The 1980s weren't supposed to be dangerous. Emission controls had strangled the fire out of Detroit's finest, and safety regulations had turned muscle cars into shadows of their former selves. But beneath the surface, a rebellion was brewing. Engineers found loopholes, designers pushed boundaries, and a handful of machines emerged that were faster, wilder, and more lethal than anything the government thought possible. Today, we're counting down the 12 most dangerous muscle cars out of the 1980s, the ones that proved American power never really died. Number 12, the 1987 Buick Grand National GNX. Most people remember the 80s for neon colors and synthesizers, but Buick had something darker in mind. The Grand National GNX arrived in 1987 like a shadow with a supercharger, painted entirely in black with nothing but menacing gray accents to break the darkness. This wasn't your grandfather's Buick anymore. This was a car that could embarrass Corvettes at stoplights and make Ferrari owners question their life choices. Under that sinister hood sat a turbocharged 3.8-liter V6 that most people would have laughed at on paper. 6 cylinders in a muscle car. But McLaren Performance Technologies had worked their magic, and what emerged was a beast producing 276 horsepower and 160 pound-feet of torque. Those numbers were conservative. Real-world testing showed the GNX was putting down closer to 300 horsepower, and Buick knew it. They just didn't want the insurance companies to know it too. The danger came from expectation versus reality. This was a full-size luxury coupe that weighed 3,500 pounds, riding on a chassis designed for comfort cruising, not canyon carving. But that turbocharged 6 would launch you from 0 to 60 in 4.7 seconds, and the quarter mile disappeared in 13.5 seconds, at just over 100 miles per hour. The problem was, the suspension and steering were designed for a different era, a softer time. Push it hard into a corner and the GNX would remind you that physics doesn't care about horsepower. The rear end wanted to come around, and the brakes weren't designed for repeated hard stops from triple-digit speeds. Only 547 GNX models were ever built, and every single one became an instant legend. But that legend came with a warning label most people ignored. Number 11, the 1982 Chevrolet Camaro Z28 Indy 500 pace car. Chevrolet wanted to celebrate their Indy 500 pace car duties in 1982, so they created a limited edition Z28 that looked fast standing still. The problem was, it had the performance to back up those looks, wrapped in a package that could bite the unprepared driver hard. This wasn't just a sticker package. This was a full-throated muscle car revival, wearing silver and blue war paint. The heart of this beast was the 5.0-liter Crossfire injected small-block V8, pushing 165 horsepower through a 4-speed manual transmission. Now, compared to what came before, those numbers sound almost tame. But in 1982, this was serious power, especially when wrapped in a chassis that weighed just over 3,200 pounds. The Crossfire injection system was Chevrolet's answer to fuel efficiency regulations, using twin-throttle bodies that sat on top of the engine like something from a science fiction film. What made this Camaro dangerous was the combination of narrow tires, a solid rear axle, and enough power to overwhelm both without warning. The T-top roof configuration that most of these came with also reduced structural rigidity, meaning the car could flex and twist under hard cornering loads in ways the engineers never intended. Push it hard through a sweeper, lift off the throttle suddenly, and the back end would snap around faster than most drivers could react. The steering was slow and vague by modern standards, giving you just enough feedback to think you were in control right up until you weren't. And the quarter mile would pass in 15.5 seconds. But those numbers don't tell you about the snap oversteer or the drum brakes in the rear that would fade after one hard mountain run. 6,260 of these pace car editions rolled off the line, and they taught a generation of drivers to respect throttle control. Number 10, the 1989 Dodge Shelby Dakota. When Carroll Shelby decided to work his magic on a pickup truck, most people thought he'd lost his mind. They were wrong. The 1989 Dodge Shelby Dakota was proof that danger comes in unexpected packages, and sometimes the most lethal machines are the ones you never see coming. This wasn't a muscle car in the traditional sense. but it had more muscle car DNA than most coupes of the era, and it was far more willing to kill you if you didn't show it proper respect. Shelby stuffed a 5.9-liter V8 under the hood, rated at 175 horsepower and 270 pound-feet of torque. That engine was mated to either a 5-speed manual or a 4-speed automatic, and the whole package sat on a shortened Dakota chassis that was never designed for this kind of abuse. The truck rode lower than stock, wore aggressive body cladding in red and silver, and looked like it meant business. And it did. This thing could run from 0 to 60 in 7.6 seconds and clear the quarter mile in 15.9 seconds at 86 miles per hour. The danger came from the fundamentals. This was a truck with a short wheelbase, rear-wheel drive, and virtually no weight over those rear wheels. Hit a wet corner with any enthusiasm, and the back end would swap ends so fast you'd think someone cut your steering linkage. The manual transmission models were especially treacherous because that V8 had enough torque to break the rear tires loose in any of the first 3 gears, even on dry pavement. Add in the fact that most buyers used these as actual trucks, loading them down with cargo that shifted the weight balance even further, and you had a recipe for disaster. Only 1,475 Shelby Dakotas were built over 2 model years, and survivors today command serious respect from anyone who understands what they're capable of. This wasn't a truck for weekend warriors. This was a machine that demanded skill, attention, and a healthy understanding that physics applies to pickups just as brutally as it applies to sports cars. Number 9, the 1984 Pontiac Fiero 2M4. The Pontiac Fiero was supposed to be GM's answer to the mid-engine sports car revolution, a fuel-efficient commuter wrapped in futuristic styling. But in 1984, Pontiac decided to drop a bigger engine in the middle of that plastic body, and the result was the 2M4, a car that looked like a Ferrari's baby brother but handled like a temperamental exotic when pushed beyond its limits. The 2M4 came with a 2.5-liter 4-cylinder engine, making 92 horsepower, which sounds pathetic until you remember this car weighed just over 2,500 pounds and had its engine sitting right behind the driver's head. But the real danger models were the later V6 versions, especially the 1988 GT that packed a 2.8-liter V6, making 140 horsepower. That might not sound like much, but in a mid-engine car with a short wheelbase and snap oversteer characteristics, it was more than enough to get you into serious trouble. The Fiero's danger came from its mid-engine layout, combined with cost-cutting measures that left it with suspension components borrowed from the Chevrolet Chevette and Citation, economy cars that had no business donating parts to a sports car. The weight distribution was excellent on paper, 44% front and 56% rear, but that rear weight bias meant the car would rotate aggressively if you lifted off the throttle mid-corner. Early models also suffered from engine fires due to poor cooling system design, earning the Fiero a reputation that followed it throughout its entire production run. The combination of plastic body panels that could hide accident damage, a tendency to snap into oversteer, and brakes that were marginal at best made the Fiero 2M4 a car that rewarded smooth inputs and punished aggression. And closer to 7.6 seconds for the V6 GT. But those numbers don't capture the way this car could surprise you when you thought you were driving well within its limits. More than 240,000 Fieros were built between 1984 and 1988, and they taught countless drivers that mid-engine handling isn't something you can take lightly. Number 8, the 1984 Ford Mustang SVO. Ford's Special Vehicle Operations Team had a mission in 1984, prove that a turbocharged 4-cylinder could outrun a V8 and do it with style. The Mustang SVO was their answer, a high-tech muscle car that traded displacement for boost pressure and tradition for innovation. It was brilliant, it was fast, and in the wrong hands, it was absolutely treacherous. Under the hood sat a turbocharged 2.3-liter 4-cylinder engine, producing 175 horsepower and 210 pound-feet of torque. That Turbo 4 was mated to a 5-speed manual transmission and backed by a sophisticated suspension system that included adjustable Coney shocks and a 4-wheel disc brake setup that was rare for the era. The SVO could run from 0 to 60 in 7.5 seconds and complete the quarter mile in 15.5 seconds at 90 miles per hour. Those were respectable numbers, especially considering the fuel efficiency this thing could achieve when you kept your foot out of it. But the danger lurked in the turbo lag and the chassis dynamics. Mash the throttle at low RPM, and nothing would happen for what felt like an eternity. Then suddenly, around 3,000 RPM, all that boost would come flooding in like a tidal wave, overwhelming the rear tires and lighting them up even in third gear. The transition from docile cruiser to tire-shredding monster happened so abruptly that countless drivers found themselves sideways before they realized what had happened. The SVO also sat on relatively narrow tires for its performance capability, and the combination of turbo lag, limited rubber, and a solid rear axle meant that throttle control was absolutely critical. Lift off suddenly in a corner, and the weight transfer would unload the rear end, sending you into a spin. Stay on the power, and you'd overwhelm the tires and slide wide. The narrow window between those two outcomes required skill and experience that most buyers simply didn't have. Ford only built 9,844 SVOs over 3 model years, and the car gained a reputation as a thinking person's muscle car. Emphasis on the thinking part, because if you didn't think carefully about your inputs, the SVO would teach you an expensive lesson. Number 7, the 1982 to 85 Ford Mustang GT 5.0. When Ford reintroduced the 5.0-liter V8 to the Mustang lineup in 1982, they didn't just wake up the pony car. They unleashed something that would define street racing for the rest of the decade. The Mustang GT 5.0 became the benchmark, the king of the boulevard, and the car that launched 1,000 street races. It was also a car that could swap ends faster than you could blink if you didn't respect what that V8 could do. The early 5.0 GTs started with 157 horsepower in 1982, climbing to 175 by 1983, and hitting 210 horsepower by 1985 with the addition of fuel injection. That last number made it one of the most powerful cars you could buy from an American manufacturer in the mid-80s, and the performance reflected it. The 1985 GT could hit 60 miles per hour in just over 6 seconds and run the quarter mile in the low 14-second range at close to 100 miles per hour. For context, that was faster than most European sports cars of the era, and it cost a fraction of what those imports demanded. The danger came from the chassis struggling to keep up with the power. The Mustang rode on a platform that traced its roots back to the 1970s Fairmont, an economy sedan that was never designed for high-performance driving. The solid rear axle would hop and skip under hard acceleration, especially over bumpy surfaces, and the McPherson strut-front suspension offered minimal feedback and even less feel. The rear end wanted to come around under any provocation, lift off the throttle, hit a bump, breathe wrong, and the skinny tires of the era meant traction was always optional. Four-wheel disc brakes helped, but they weren't ventilated in the early years, and repeated hard stops would fade them faster than you could say brake failure. The Fox body Mustang's lightweight construction, around 3,000 pounds, meant that all that power had an easy time overwhelming the chassis. Thousands of young drivers learned about lift-off oversteer, weight transfer, and the importance of smooth inputs behind the wheel of a 5.0 GT, and many of them learned those lessons the hard way. But that danger was part of the appeal. This was a car that demanded respect, rewarded skill, and punished arrogance. It was pure American muscle in its most honest form. Number 6, the 1987 Ford Thunderbird Turbo Coupe. Ford's Thunderbird had evolved from personal luxury cruiser to serious performance machine by the mid-80s, and the 1987 Turbo Coupe represented the pinnacle of that transformation. This was a car that could hang with Corvettes on a road course, embarrass BMWs in a straight line, and look sophisticated doing it. But beneath that sleek, aerodynamic body lurked a turbocharged beast that could bite hard if you pushed it beyond its considerable limits. The Turbo Coupe packed a turbocharged 2.3-liter four-cylinder, making 190 horsepower and 240 pound-feet of torque. That Turbo 4 was backed by either a 5-speed manual or a 4-speed automatic, and the whole package sat on a sophisticated suspension system that included independent rear suspension, a rarity for American cars in the 80s. The Turbo Coupe could accelerate from 0 to 60 in 7.5 seconds and run the quarter mile in 15.7 seconds at 88 miles per hour. More impressively, it could pull almost 0.85 Gs on a skid pad, which was genuine sports car territory. But all that performance came with a catch. The turbo lag was significant, creating a Jekyll and Hyde personality that could catch drivers off guard. Below 3,000 RPM, the Thunderbird felt like a luxury coupe, smooth and docile. Above that threshold with the turbo spooling up, it transformed into something aggressive and urgent. That transition could happen mid-corner, and if you weren't prepared for the sudden rush of power, you'd find yourself fighting for control as the rear end tried to overtake the front. The independent rear suspension was a blessing and a curse. It provided excellent grip and handling balance, but it also made the car's behavior more complex and less predictable than a simple solid axle setup. Snap oversteer was possible if you lifted off the throttle suddenly while cornered, and the turbo's boost could overwhelm the traction control systems that didn't exist yet. Add in the fact that this was still a large, heavy car at 3,300 pounds, and you had a machine that required finesse and understanding. The Turbo Coupe attracted driving enthusiasts who appreciated its sophistication, but it also attracted people who thought they were better drivers than they actually were. The difference between those two groups usually became apparent within the first few hard corners. Number 5. The 1987 Chevrolet Camaro, IROC-Z. The International Race of Champions gave its name to one of the most iconic muscle cars of the 80s, and the 1987 Camaro IROC-Z wore that badge with pride. This was the car that adorned bedroom walls, starred in television shows, and defined what American performance meant to an entire generation. It was also a car that could kill you if you didn't understand that horsepower without respect is just an express ticket to the scene of the accident. The top-spec IROC-Z came with the legendary 5.7-liter L98 tuned port injection V8, producing 220 horsepower and 290 pound-feet of torque. That engine transformed the Camaro from pretender to contender, delivering 0 to 60 acceleration in 6.2 seconds and quarter-mile times in the mid-14-second range at 95 miles per hour. The tuned port injection system was cutting-edge technology for the era, using long runners to build low-end torque while maintaining high RPM power. The result was a power plant that pulled strong from idle to redline, with a soundtrack that mixed V8 thunder with electronic fuel injection precision. The danger came from the same Fox body chassis issues that plagued the Mustang, because both cars shared similar architecture and limitations. The solid rear axle would hop under hard acceleration, the rear end wanted to come around under trailing throttle, and the brakes were marginal for sustained performance driving. But the IROC-Z added another layer of risk. It was faster than the Mustang, heavier at 3,400 pounds, and its long hood meant forward visibility was compromised. Teenage drivers with more confidence than skill bought these in droves, and the accident statistics reflected that enthusiasm. The combination of available power, period-correct all-season tires that prioritized rain performance over dry grip, and a chassis that demanded smooth inputs meant that the IROC-Z separated confident drivers from competent ones very quickly. The car looked aggressive with its ground effects, hood louvers, and distinctive gold wheels, and it could back up that aggressive appearance with legitimate performance. But performance without control is just velocity waiting to meet an immovable object, and the IROC-Z taught that lesson to thousands of drivers throughout the late 80s and early 90s. Survivors today are cherished examples of 80s excess, but back then, they were dangerous instruments that required respect, skill, and an understanding that looking fast and being fast are two very different things. Number 4. The 1984 Dodge Daytona Turbo Z. Dodge resurrected the Daytona nameplate in 1984 with a front-wheel drive turbocharged coupe that looked like it had been styled in a wind tunnel and engineered for the Autobahn. The Daytona Turbo Z was sleek, aggressive, and shockingly fast for a car that pulled instead of pushed. It was also one of the most dangerous cars of the decade because it handled in ways that defied the expectations of drivers raised on rear-wheel drive muscle. Under that aerodynamic hood sat a turbocharged 2.2-liter four-cylinder producing 142 horsepower and 160 pound-feet of torque. Later, models bumped those numbers to 174 horsepower and 200 pound-feet with intercooling and better tuning. The Turbo Z could hit 60 miles per hour in under 8 seconds and run the quarter mile in the mid-15-second range. Those numbers were impressive, but they told only half the story. The other half was written in torque steer, turbo lag, and front-wheel drive dynamics that could catch any driver off guard. Mash the throttle in a Daytona Turbo Z, and the steering wheel would try to tear itself out of your hands as all that turbocharged torque hit the front wheels. The car would pull to one side then the other, fighting your inputs, while the turbo spooled up and dumped even more power through tires that were already overwhelmed. In wet conditions, the Daytona became nearly undrivable at full throttle, spinning the front wheels uselessly while the car barely moved forward. But the real danger came in corners. Unlike rear-wheel drive cars that would oversteer when pushed too hard, the Daytona would understeer, plowing straight ahead, while the front tires scrubbed off speed and composure. Lift off the throttle suddenly to correct that understeer, and you'd trigger lift-off oversteer as the weight transferred forward and the light rear end tried to come around. The transition from understeer to oversteer happened so quickly that most drivers would overcorrect, creating a tank slapper that could send you into oncoming traffic or off the road entirely. The Daytona's low, wedge-shaped design also meant that forward visibility was compromised, and the pop-up headlights created aerodynamic lift at high speeds that reduced front-end grip exactly when you needed it most. This was a car that required a completely different driving technique than anything most American drivers had experienced, and the learning curve was steep and unforgiving. Dodge built the Daytona through 1993 in various forms, and while later models became more refined, that early Turbo Z remained a wild, unpredictable machine that could embarrass sports cars in a straight line, and then swap ends the moment you tried to prove you could corner as well. Number 3. The 1982 Chevrolet Corvette. The 1982 Corvette holds a unique place in automotive history as the last year of the C3 generation and a car that represented the end of an era. This wasn't the fastest Corvette ever built. It wasn't the prettiest, but it was dangerous in ways that went beyond simple performance numbers because it combined legitimate speed with handling dynamics that belonged to a different decade. Under that long, sloping hood sat a 5.7-liter L83 V8, making just 185 horsepower thanks to emission controls that strangled the life out of the Corvette's performance. But even detuned, this was still a Corvette, and it could accelerate from 0 to 60 in 8.5 seconds and run the quarter mile in 16.1 seconds at 83 miles per hour. The chassis, however, was essentially unchanged from 1968, meaning you were piloting 14-year-old technology at speeds that technology was never designed to handle safely. The danger came from false confidence. The Corvette badge, the aggressive styling, and the V8 rumble made drivers believe they were piloting a sophisticated sports car. They weren't. They were driving a heavy front-engined, live-axle muscle car with steering that was slower than a school bus and brakes that faded faster than a summer tan. The Corvette's fiberglass body also meant that minor accidents often resulted in significant damage, and the car's low ground clearance made it easy to damage the undercarriage on anything rougher than a parking lot. The rear weight bias of 48% front and 52% rear should have provided good handling balance, but the solid rear axle and soft suspension meant the Corvette would hop and skip over bumps, especially when accelerating hard out of corners. The T-top roof that most examples featured also reduced chassis rigidity, meaning the car would flex and twist in ways that made precise handling impossible. Push a 1982 Corvette hard, and you'd discover understeer at corner entry, followed by sudden snap oversteer if you lifted off the throttle. The transition happened with little warning and even less progressiveness, and the slow steering meant you were always behind the car's rotation, chasing the back end with insufficient lock and too much optimism. Only 6,324 Corvettes were built in 1982 because production was shut down early to prepare for the all-new C4 generation. That rarity makes survivors valuable today, but back in the 80s, this was a car that wrote checks its chassis couldn't cash. It looked like a weapon, sounded like a weapon, but handled like a compromise between performance and luxury that satisfied neither goal completely. The 1982 Corvette taught a generation of drivers that the badge on the hood doesn't guarantee competence, and that sometimes the most dangerous machine is the one that makes you think you're better than you are. Number 2, the 1987 Pontiac Firebird Trans Am GTA. Pontiac took everything they'd learned from decades of building Trans Ams and poured it into the 1987 GTA, creating a machine that was part muscle car, part grand tour, and entirely capable of exceeding the abilities of most drivers foolish enough to explore its limits. The GTA stood for Gran Turismo Americano, and it represented Pontiac's most serious attempt at building a world-class performance car. It succeeded. It was also one of the most dangerous vehicles of the decade. The GTA came with the same 5.7-liter L98 tuned port injection V8 as the Camaro IROC-Z, producing 225 horsepower and 295 pound-feet of torque. But Pontiac didn't stop there. They added PW 16-inch wheels, wrapped in Goodyear Eagle GT tires, four-wheel disc brakes with rear ventilation, and WS6 suspension with Delco Bilstein shocks. The GTA also featured a limited slip differential, performance exhaust, and every luxury feature Pontiac could bolt on. The result was a car that could accelerate from 0 to 60 in 6.0 seconds flat and complete the quarter mile in 14.3 seconds at 97 miles per hour while pulling 0.87 Gs on a skid pad. Those numbers made the GTA one of the fastest cars you could buy from an American manufacturer in 1987, and the performance was backed by handling that was genuinely impressive for the era. But all that performance came wrapped in a chassis that still used a solid rear axle, and no amount of sophisticated dampers could completely overcome the fundamental limitations of that design. The GTA could rotate violently if you lifted off the throttle mid-corner, and the available power was more than enough to overwhelm the rear tires in any gear below fourth. The car weighed 3,550 pounds, which was substantial, and that weight took time to change direction. The GTA rewarded smooth inputs and punished sudden corrections, but its performance envelope was so high that drivers would exceed the limits of adhesion before they realized they'd entered dangerous territory. The Recaro leather seats, premium sound system, and comprehensive digital dash made the GTA feel like a luxury car, which created a false sense of security. You'd be cruising along in comfort, then suddenly you'd be exploring the limits of grip and discovering that those limits arrived faster and less forgivingly than the comfortable interior suggested. The T-top roof that most GTAs featured also compromised chassis stiffness, allowing the car to flex in ways that made handling less predictable. Pontiac only built around 5,000 GTA models in 1987, and they represented the peak of third-generation F-body performance. But that peak was sharp and unforgiving, and the GTA taught countless drivers that sophisticated doesn't mean safe, and that sometimes the most dangerous machines are the ones that make you think you're in complete control, right up until the moment you discover you're not. Number 1. The 1984 to 86 Dodge Shelby Charger. When Carroll Shelby partnered with Dodge in the 1980s, most people expected modified Vipers or updated Daytonas. What they got instead was the Shelby Charger, a front-wheel drive turbocharged hatchback that looked like an economy car and drove like something that escaped from a racing paddock. This wasn't the most powerful car of the 80s. It wasn't the fastest, but it was the most dangerous because it combined legitimate performance with handling characteristics that were alien to American drivers, and wrapped the whole package in a body that looked like it came from the rental car fleet. The Shelby Charger started life as a Dodge Omni GLH, which stood for Goes Like Hell, but Shelby took it further. Under the hood sat a turbocharged 2.2-liter four-cylinder, producing 146 horsepower and 170 pound-feet of torque. That might not sound impressive until you remember this car weighed just 2,400 pounds, giving it a power-to-weight ratio that embarrassed muscle cars twice its size. The Shelby Charger could hit 60 miles per hour in 7.8 seconds and run the quarter mile in 15.9 seconds. But those numbers don't capture the violence of the turbocharged power delivery or the way this car could rotate on its axis like a figure skater with a death wish. The danger came from every aspect of the Shelby Charger's design. It was front-wheel drive, which meant torque steer was constant and dramatic. Mash the throttle, and the steering wheel would rip left or right depending on which front tire had slightly better grip. The turbo lag meant power delivery was all or nothing. Docile one moment, overwhelming the next. Lift off the throttle mid-corner, and the rear end would come around so fast you'd swear someone had greased the back tires. The Shelby Charger could transition from understeer to oversteer and back to understeer in a single corner, creating a handling balance that was less neutral and more actively trying to kill you. The brakes were marginal at best, borrowed from the economy car platform this was based on, and repeated hard stops would fade them into uselessness. The Recaro seats and Shelby badging suggested performance, but the skinny tires and basic suspension meant the car was always operating at the edge of chaos. Push it hard, and you'd discover levels of oversteer that front-wheel drive cars weren't supposed to achieve, combined with torque steer that made straight-line acceleration feel like a wrestling match with the steering wheel. The Shelby Charger also suffered from terrible rear visibility thanks to thick C-pillars, and the hatchback design meant the car was loud at highway speeds, filling the cabin with wind noise and tire roar that made long trips exhausting. But none of that mattered when you were attacking a back road, feeling the turbo spool up, fighting the torque steer, and discovering that this innocent-looking hatchback could outcorner and outrun machines that cost 5 times as much. Dodge and Shelby built around 7,500 Chargers over 3 model years, and they represented the most honest, uncompromising interpretation of performance in the 1980s. No luxury, no compromise, no forgiveness, just raw, turbocharged acceleration wrapped in a package that demanded every ounce of your attention and rewarded skill while punishing overconfidence. The Shelby Charger wasn't trying to be the fastest or the most powerful. It was trying to be pure, and in that purity, it became the most dangerous muscle car of the decade. Because when everything else had been regulated and restricted and softened for safety, the Shelby Charger arrived to remind everyone that real performance has always been dangerous, and probably always will be. These 12 machines weren't just cars, they were statements, declarations that American performance hadn't died. It had just gone underground, learned new tricks, and emerged fiercer than anyone expected. Some used turbos, others relied on old-fashioned V8 torque, but every single one proved that danger and excitement never really left Detroit. They just evolved. Which of these 80s legends would you be brave enough to drive? Drop your answer in the comments below, and if you love stories from the era when muscle cars learned to bite back, hit that subscribe button, because there's more history worth remembering and more machines worth respecting.